Serious accusation at the Brazilian Football Confederation. Lance found out that the sister of the CBF president, Samir Xaud, took a trip paid for by the Confederation. Vicente Seda uncovered everything. Seda, how are you? Good. Share what you found.
Well, it was another trip, right, that came to light that was fully paid for by the CBF. We have all the documentation showing how this was paid. It was done through a travel agency which has been providing services to the CBF for a long time. And according to the CBF's internal regulations, only spouses can have this type of trip billed through the official agency. And it was a trip, well, where the dates coincide exactly with 2 friendly matches of the Brazilian national team against South Korea and against Japan. The trip first went to to Seoul, and then she returned via Tokyo Airport. This ticket was also business class. It cost more than 83,000 reais. And besides this trip, we also got all the proof, all the invoices for the trips paid to an influencer and a businesswoman. Also from the fit sector, the president of the CBF himself has business in this sector. She is from the same hometown as the president. And in the end, all these invoices ended up going through the official CBF agency, which is prohibited by the internal regulations. And we often hear when this kind of thing is mentioned that the CBF is a private entity and so on. But it's an entity that carries the colors of Brazil when it's at the World Cup, right? But then when a complaint comes up, they hide behind the claim that it's a private entity. So things need to be done properly. Yeah, in this case, this situation with travel, personal expenses going through the CBF, this isn't unprecedented in the organization. Yeah, the previous president, Reginaldo Rodrigues, also faced this kind of accusation. And there's a very turbulent political environment in the CBF, right? If we look at the last presidents of the CBF, Zé Maria Marim, Ricardo Teixeira himself, Marco Polo Del Nero, Rogério Caboclo, all of them fell. None of them, right, stayed indefinitely, even though we have an electoral structure not only in the CBF, but in all the federations, including FIFA, that makes it very easy to stay in power. In the CBF, that doesn't happen because there's always a very heated power struggle. There are a lot of forces involved there wanting to bring each other down. And what's happening now is that Xaud is in a very complicated situation internally. He's facing a lot of internal scrutiny. This is shaking up the internal climate, even though people want to make it seem like it's not. But yes, it is a very delicate situation. And we can see that there is a strong push for another change in power in the organization. We don't know how successful this movement will be or not. But the fact is, if Brazil advance far in the World Cup, this could get a little more complicated. Now, with the way Brazil was eliminated in the round of 16, this process might speed up.
I was going to get to that, but before we discuss the behind-the-scenes drama, can you give more details about the complaint? Where was the trip to and what did it cost? What was the bill, the total amount of the bill? Who exactly went on the trip? You, I'm sure, right? You contacted the CBF, tried to talk to the president as well, right? So sum it up for us, Sida. Yes, Sida.
We've had this information for a few days. Of course, we always try to be as careful as possible in our investigation. And listening to all sides isn't a favor, it's an obligation. And we listened to the CBF. We spoke with the communications department. At first, they said they wouldn't respond. And then I specifically asked about the president's sister's trip, which hadn't been reported yet. And they informed me that, look, this was paid directly by Samir. It didn't go through the CBF. But we have documents that prove it did go through, that it was billed by the CBF. We even have the cost center, which was from the regional federations. In the case of the influencer, the cost center was directly from the presidency. These are expensive tickets, right? First class, business class. In the case of Xaud's sister, it's 83,000 reais. In the case of the influencer, 100,000 reais was spent. In other words, it's a lot of money if you add up all these accommodations and tickets that we, at least the ones we have documented proof for, it's already over 300,000 reais. So these are very high amounts and they need an explanation, right? They need an explanation.
Yeah, well, I imagine that behind the scenes at the Confederation, with everything you've already mentioned, the early elimination from the World Cup, the questions now, right, are about the early renewal of Ancelotti's contract. And now this accusation, right, another one that adds to the one that had already happened during the World Cup regarding the influencer as well. Another ticket supposedly paid for by the CBF for a person who isn't exactly connected to football or to the Confederation's activities. How does it feel in the Confederation right now?
Yeah, so it's pretty hectic. Yeah. Actually, we also managed to get all the proof, right? All the invoices for those influencer trips and for that businesswoman's trips that had already been reported a while before, back during the World Cup. Then Xaud's sister's trip, which was, well, the dates coincided with friendly matches, right, of the national team against South Korea and against Japan. But the atmosphere is pretty tense. And we don't really know, we can't really measure how fast or how soon a power shift might happen in the CBF. But we know there are very powerful forces at work to make this happen.
Who are these forces, Cedro?
Look, we don't have concrete proof of who these forces at work are. But we know that there are very powerful people involved. We know that the CBF has partnerships with very powerful people, and there are people who have gained prominence within the organization. You see a vice president who has taken a very prominent role in the case of Gustavo Henrique Diaz, who is the son of Gilmar Mendes, the Supreme Court Justice. He was the one responsible for conducting those negotiations about a single league with the clubs. So we don't know exactly, right? We can't say for sure exactly who is trying to bring him down. But we know that there is a general dissatisfaction within the organization with the president's behavior. He is in a delicate situation, and we don't know how long he can withstand this. Because if you look at previous presidents, at some point they ended up being overthrown.
They couldn't finish. Yeah, and this draws attention because of how fast this process is happening. Because when Samir was chosen as president of the CBF, yeah, what people said was that he was pretty much a consensus choice, right? A person who could balance all these forces that exist within the Confederation. What happened for things to fall apart like this, apparently so quickly?
Look, he himself, right after he was elected, he managed to gain support very quickly, because he took some measures that had already been widely called for, not only within the CBF, but also by the clubs and so on. There were improvements in refereeing. One of the problems with Reginaldo's management was that he cut funding for refereeing. That was heavily criticized. So Samir has already managed to make some improvements to the refereeing commission. He started to implement financial fair play planning. There was an adjustment to the calendar, even though it's not ideal, but there has already been a reduction in state championships. And anyway, he managed to gain support very quickly. To what extent did he start? The thing is, he was put there whenever the president, he wasn't someone who had much clout within the CBF. He was a director from Roraima. He ran for election as a congressman twice and didn't make it. And he wasn't someone who had a lot of power in the CBF. In other words, he had some backing behind him. It's not known to what extent he started breaking agreements or not following through on things he had arranged with the people who backed his rise. And maybe that's why he's starting to face this kind of internal pressure, right? But that's just what we imagine. It's how we connect the dots, right? Based on what we see happening. But there's no clear indication like, oh, it's this person here who wants to bring him down. But we know, we can see from what's been happening from the comments and everything that there's an internal movement for a power shift right now, no doubt.
I imagine you're still following this situation, right? Is there any way to predict the next steps, right?
Look, making predictions is difficult, but given the situation, if you put 2 and 2 together, it points to an early exit for Brazil. The way it happened with cycle planning, the way the cycle went. For this World Cup, you had a change in leadership and several coaching changes. You get to a World Cup with a team that couldn't field the same lineup, had no identity. In other words, a team still taking shape. There are several problems, and they fall on the president's shoulders. We can't say how quickly things will move, but we can see that the environment is becoming more and more favorable for this kind of thing to happen.
Perfect. The report is already published on the Lance website. The link is here in the description of this video. You who have watched until now, you like our content, right? You like this approach from Vicente Serra, right? Investigative journalism about soccer behind the scenes. Check out our website, like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Seda asks people to subscribe.
Go ahead and subscribe, folks.